Sulfuras was the first legendary weapon players could actually get their hands on, and it set the tone for everything that came after. This was a two-handed mace available to warriors, paladins, shamans and druids, and getting it was less about skill and more about gold and patience. You needed the Eye of Sulfuras, roughly a 3% drop from Ragnaros. You also needed a Sulfuron hammer, a terrible weapon itself but extremely expensive to craft. The Sulfuron hammer alone required 8 Sulfuron ingots, each one a rare drop from Golemag in the same raid, plus a bunch of Arcanite bars and other expensive materials. The whole thing was a gold sink disguised as a legendary. You even had to go all the way to the Black Anvil in Blackrock Depths just to craft the thing. And then, after all of that, you combined the hammer with the eye and finally held Ragnaros' weapon in your hands. When equipped, it had a chance to fireball your target and deal a bit of fire damage back to anything that hit you in melee. The model was incredible for its time, this massive flaming mace that announced to everyone in Orgrimmar exactly what kind of guild you ran with. Sulfuras established the formula that would define legendaries for years. Rare drop plus massive material investment plus guild coordination equals orange text. For the warriors and paladins lucky enough to get one, nothing else came close. Did somebody say Thunderfury, blessed blade of the Windseeker? If you played WoW at any point in the last 20 years, you know this name. Not necessarily because you owned one, but because someone in trade chat was spamming the link. The "Did someone say Thunderfury, blessed blade of the Windseeker" meme became so embedded in the culture that Blizzard actually added an inflatable Thunderfury toy as a nod to it. The name was just long enough and just orange enough to make linking it endlessly appealing, and that joke never stopped. But the weapon itself was no joke. Thunderfury was a one-handed sword, and on paper the raw stats were not that impressive compared to some late-game options. What made it the best tanking weapon in vanilla was the proc. Every hit had a chance to blast your current target with nature damage and then chain that damage to nearby enemies, reducing their nature resistance and slowing their attack speed by 20% for 12 seconds. For a protection warrior, in an era where holding threat against 40 people was the hardest part of raiding, that proc was everything. A tank with Thunderfury could let the entire DPS lineup go harder. Warriors could pop Recklessness without worrying about ripping threat. Mages could push their Ignite stacks further. The difference between a guild that had a Thunderfury tank and one that did not was night and day, and everyone in the raid felt it. Getting it was its own saga. You needed the left and right bindings of the Windseeker, which dropped from Baron Geddon and Gar in Molten Core at roughly 3 to 5% each. 2 separate drops from 2 separate bosses, both on a weekly lockout. Some guilds saw both bindings within a month. Others ran Molten Core every single week for over a year and never completed a set. There was no bad luck protection, no pity timer, nothing. Just dice rolls and prayer. Once you had both, you still needed 10 enchanted Elementium bars, which required materials from Blackwing Lair and a blacksmith who had learned Elementium smelting. Then you fought Thunderarn himself, the original owner of the blade, in an outdoor encounter in Silithus. In Classic, that fight required a full raid. In Retail, you sneeze on him. The lore behind the blade involved Thunderarn, the Prince of Air, who was defeated and imprisoned by Ragnaros. Assembling the bindings essentially freed him, so you could kill him again and take his sword. Most players did not care about any of that. They cared about the orange text and what it did to their threat meters. Because of the binding RNG, guilds went to war over who got priority. The main tank was the obvious choice, but some guilds ran Molten Core for so long without seeing bindings that by the time one dropped, there were 3 or 4 tanks who felt they deserved it. The weapon was so dominant for tanking that it stayed relevant well into Burning Crusade. Despite getting its threat nerfed by 50%, tanks were still using it in Karajan. It eventually got a visual callback as the hidden artifact appearance for Outlaw Rogues in Legion, and even crossed over into Diablo 3 with a similar chain lightning effect. 20 years later, people are still farming the bindings. Some of them are still waiting, and the weapon itself is still one of the only legendaries designed for tanks, a role that almost never gets the orange treatment. That alone makes it an outlier in a list dominated by DPS weapons. Atiesh is the rarest legendary most players will never see. The original 40-man Naxxramas that most players in 2006 never even set foot in because the attunement and gear requirements were so steep. Atiesh was restricted to mages, warlocks, priests and druids, and each class got their own version with slightly different stats plus a unique party aura. The real flex was the portal to Karazhan, it granted, which was a fun novelty when the staff launched, since Karazhan did not actually exist as a raid yet. It became genuinely useful once Burning Crusade dropped. To finish the questline, you needed the staff head from KT, the base from K'Thun, and then a trip to Strathome to purify it by fighting a demon literally named Atiesh. When Naxxramas moved to Northrend in the Wrath pre-patch, the splinters were removed from the loot tables entirely. If you did not finish it in vanilla, you were done. That made Atiesh arguably the rarest legendary in the game for over a decade, at least until classic servers brought it back. Seeing someone with Atiesh in a capital city during those years was like spotting a unicorn. Most players who had it were from guilds that cleared original Nax, which was a tiny fraction of the player base. The staff itself was best in slot for casters for the rest of vanilla, and the party aura it provided meant your group literally performed better just by standing near you. It was a guild project that required a guild capable of clearing the hardest content in the game, which is exactly why so few people ever finished it. In 2007, Burning Crusade changed how legendaries worked. No more questlines, no more crafting. The Warglaives of Azzinoth just dropped from Illidan Stormrage in Black Temple, and you either got lucky or you did not. They were a pair of one-handed swords, main hand and offhand, and you needed both to activate their set bonuses. The first bonus gave your attacks a proc that boosted your haste for 10 seconds. The second increased your attack power against demons, which was more relevant than it sounds, given that Burning Crusade was wall-to-wall demon content. Individually, they were strong weapons. Together, they were the most recognisable gear in the game. And unlike the Fangs of the Father tier set bonuses that came later, the Warglaive set bonuses still work in time-walking content to this day. The thing about the Warglaives was that everyone wanted them, and almost nobody could use them properly when they first came out. They were classified as swords, which meant warriors and rogues were the only classes that could equip them at launch. No demon hunters existed yet. So Illidan's own weapons, the defining gear of the demon hunter fantasy, sat in the hands of rogues and warriors for 9 years, until Legion finally added the class. The drop rates were brutal, and the set bonus required both pieces, so completing the pair was a long-term commitment, even when you were soloing the raid in later expansions. Getting one glaive felt great. Getting the same one twice in a row felt terrible. And the offhand had a reputation for being the stubborn one, spawning forum threads about Warglaive drop luck that ran for years. In their own era, Burning Crusade guilds would funnel kills to one player for months and still not see a complete set. Black Temple had 9 bosses before Illidan, every one of which you had to clear each week, just for one shot at each glaive. There was genuine heartbreak involved, and when demon hunters did arrive in Legion, they could not even transmog the glaives right away. You needed to have both drop on a single character, then clear the Black Temple time-walking raid during the Burning Crusade time-walking event to earn the appearance. That event only came around every few months. Players who had farmed both glaives on a warrior years before demon hunters existed had to watch them sit in their bank, untransmogable on the one class that should have had them. Blizzard eventually loosened the requirements so any eligible class could contribute to the achievement. But the transmog itself remained demon hunter only. Rogues and warriors who had spent years farming Black Temple still cannot use the appearance. It remains one of the more frustrating transmog restrictions in the game. The silhouette of the Warglaives is as recognisable as any icon in the franchise, and that recognition is doing most of the heavy lifting here. As actual gameplay tools, they were strong but not transformative. The haste proc was nice, the demon damage bonus was situational, but none of that mattered. These were Illidan's weapons. The guy on the Burning Crusade box, the guy on the Legion box, the "you are not prepared" guy. That recognition carried the Warglaives further than any proc ever could. Most people assume Thori'dal was a hunter weapon, and sure, it was a legendary bow that dropped from Kill Jaden, the hardest boss in Burning Crusade. But what made it special was 4 words in the tooltip: does not use ammo. Hunters in 2008 had to carry stacks of arrows or bullets for every raid, every dungeon, every session. Running out mid-fight was a real thing that happened to real people. Thori'dal eliminated that problem entirely, and even baked in the haste bonus you would normally get from a quiver, freeing up a whole bag slot. At about a 7% drop rate from the final boss of the hardest raid tier, very few guilds saw it, while the content was current. Sunwell was a wall that most raiding guilds never got past, let alone on farm, so Thori'dal sightings during actual Burning Crusade were extremely rare. The ones that did had to make a choice, and not everyone made the right one. A guild called Vicarious on Area 52 became infamous for master looting the bow to a rogue over 2 hunters in the raid. Their justification was loyalty and attendance, but the community response was immediate and brutal. The incident became one of the most referenced loot drama stories in WoW history, and cemented a lesson most guilds already knew. You give the hunter bow to the hunter. Thori'dal was also the last legendary in Burning Crusade, and the only ranged weapon legendary until Rae'shalare showed up in Shadowlands 13 years later. Hunters went over a decade without a legendary of their own, and Thori'dal's brief existence made that drought sting even more for anyone who remembered what it felt like to never buy arrows again. Val'anyr was the first legendary built specifically for healers. It dropped as fragments from bosses in 25-man Ulduar, with roughly a 10% chance per boss on normal and around 20% on hard modes. You needed 30 fragments total, and Yogg-Saron always guaranteed one. Once you had them all, the questline sent you back to Yogg-Saron to throw your reforged hammer into his maw during a specific phase of the fight. Miss the timing and nothing happened. Hit it right, kill Yogg, and the completed mace dropped from his corpse. The proc was a 10% chance on any heal to grant a 15-second window where all your healing also created absorption shields on the target, stacking up to 20,000 damage absorbed. Holy Paladins got priority in most guilds because their big direct heals created the fattest shields. Resto Druids were second because their hots kept ticking and stacking shields throughout the whole window. Disc Priests got it last because power, Word Shield did not count as healing for the proc. Blizzard even had to post an official blue explaining how the mechanic worked because so many guild leaders were making bad decisions about who deserved it. The mace stayed relevant for the entire expansion since Blizzard bumped its stats in patch 3.2 to keep pace with Trial of the Crusader gear. Not the flashiest legendary, but the first time healers got to feel like they had their own orange weapon instead of watching the DPS and tanks get all the fun. And it set the template for how fragment-based legendaries would work going forward, guaranteeing you would eventually finish it as long as your guild kept raiding. No more praying for a single drop that might never come. Shadowmourne. The Axe Blizzard built an entire raid around. Not literally, but close enough. Icecrown Citadel was packed with bosses, and the Shadowmourne questline used 3 of them as personal challenges you had to overcome in specific ways before you even got to the farming stage. Professor Putricide made you drink his slime concoction and transform into an abomination during the fight. Blood Queen Lanathel required you to spread her vampiric bite to 3 other players before killing her, which meant you needed at least 2 friends willing to sit through the mechanic with you. Tarecgosa demanded you stand in front of her frost breath 4 times, each one a potential wipe risk if your healers were not paying attention. These were not checklist tasks. They were encounters within encounters, designed to make you earn the weapon through the same content your guild was already progressing through. The Blood Queen fight was the wall. You could not solo the bite mechanic, you needed at least 2 other people in the raid willing to participate. And in a 25-man group where everyone was trying to pass, convincing your DPS to stop what they were doing and coordinate a bite chain was a negotiation every week. Before any of that, you had to gather 25 primordial Saronite to build Shadow's Edge, the precursor weapon. That alone was a serious gold investment early in the tier when Saronite was still selling for hundreds of gold per piece. Then came the 50 Shadowfrost shards from ICC bosses, roughly 5 to 8 per full, clear on heroic, meaning 6 to 10 weeks of lockouts just for that stage. Every single week, your guild cleared ICC, knowing that one person's legendary was inching forward while everyone else waited their turn. When a second person started collecting shards, the pace slowed down because shards were individual drops, and bosses only gave 1 per kill. The whole process took months, and during Wrath of the Lich King Classic, Blizzard actually buffed the shard drop rates and let them accumulate earlier in the questline because the original pace was punishing even by Wrath standards. But it paid off. Shadowmourne's proc was insane in both PvE and PvP. Every swing had a chance to build stacks of Soul Fragment, and at 10 stacks the weapon released Chaos Bane, exploding for shadow damage to nearby enemies and granting a massive attack power buff. It was the best melee weapon in the expansion by a wide margin. Death Knights, Warriors and Paladins all wanted it, and the Loot Council decision over who got priority could define guild politics for an entire tier. The real payoff came after the weapon was done. Killing the Lich King with Shadowmourne equipped dropped a sealed chest containing 5 items, each one tied to a major lore character. Jaina's locket opened a portal to Dalaran. Muradin's favour was a toy. Sylvanus' music box played a haunting melody. The tabard of the Lightbringer was one of the most coveted cosmetic items in the game, and the Crimson Death Charge amount became an instant status symbol. All 5 were bind on use, meaning you could sell them, and for a long time they commanded serious gold on the auction house. The sealed chest turned completing Shadowmourne into a community event. Your guild helped you build it, and the chest rewarded the whole guild economy. It was the most complete legendary experience Blizzard ever designed. A weapon that told a story through every stage of its creation, and then gave you a victory lap when it was finished. What do you actually give a caster? That was the question Blizzard had to answer in Cataclysm, after a decade of legendaries going to melee and tanks. Dragonwrath, Tarecgosa's Rest was their answer, and they got it right on the first try. The staff dropped from a lengthy Firelands questline that ran casters through weeks of eternal ember farming, then 1,000 seething cinders, and finally the Heart of Flame from Ragnaros himself. It took anywhere from 9 weeks to over 30, depending on your raid size and difficulty. But the payoff was a caster's dream. The proc duplicated your harmful spells with no internal cooldown, and it worked with DOTs. A Shadow Priest's Vampiric Touch could just fire twice. A Fire Mage's Combustion could double up mid-spread. Every caster spec had something to gain from it, and the proc rate was tuned so it benefited all of them roughly equally. But the real showstopper was the on-use effect. Activating the staff turned you into Tarecgosa, a spectral blue dragon. You could fly at max speed, and other players could ride on your back like a 2-seater mount. Your entire guild got access to the Lil Tarecgosa companion pet when you finished. It was the first legendary that rewarded your guild directly for helping you build it, and seeing a blue dragon swooping around Orgrimmar was a guaranteed whisper magnet. The guild decision on who got it first was still contentious since every caster wanted it, but the questline was designed so multiple people could work on different stages at once. Your first recipient could be collecting seething cinders, while the second person was still on eternal embers. That staggered progression made the pill easier to swallow for guilds with 3 or 4 casters who all felt they deserved it. Where most legendary questlines sent you into a raid to kill things over and over, the Fangs of the Father sent you sneaking through abandoned manors and infiltrating ruined cities. This was a rogue-only questline in Dragon's Soul, and Blizzard leaned hard into the class fantasy. You picked pockets. You broke into Ravenholt Manor using stealth, sap, and distract, navigating patrol routes with a detection radius displayed as a red circle under your feet. You assassinated a black dragon disguised as a human. You crept through the cellars of Karajan to kill Naalis and steal her blood. The whole thing felt like a spy thriller woven into the middle of a raid tier, and it was the first legendary questline that had more to do with class identity than just killing bosses. The daggers themselves came in 3 stages, each upgrade stronger than the last. Getting there meant grinding Dragon's Soul for 333 shadowy gems, then 60 Elementium gem clusters on top of that. Worse, only 1 rogue per raid could collect clusters at a time, meaning a second rogue on the questline had to wait until the first one finished. Blizzard designed that bottleneck deliberately to keep the daggers rare. The final set, Golad, Twilight of Aspects, and Tyriosh, Nightmare of Ages, had a proc that stacked agility with every melee hit, and once it hit 30 stacks, your finishing moves started generating 5 combo points for 6 seconds. The visual reward was even better. Completing the daggers gave your rogue black dragon wings that sprouted during combat. In a game where rogues spend half their time invisible, having a flashy visual proc that announced your presence was a power move that made the class feel special for the first time since vanilla PvP. The questline also introduced Wrathion, who went on to become one of the major lore characters in Mists of Pandaria and beyond. The problem with being a hunter main in WoW was that Blizzard kept forgetting you existed when it came to legendary weapons. After Thori'dal in Burning Crusade, hunters waited through Wrath, Cataclysm, Mists, Warlords and Legion without a single legendary of their own. 13 years. Rae'shalare. Death's Whisper ended that drought in Shadowlands by dropping from Sylvanas Windrunner in the Sanctum of Domination. No fragment farming, no questline, no guild coordination. Just kill Sylvanas and hope for the drop. It was personal loot, sub 5%. And it dropped at normal item level regardless of what difficulty you killed her on. You could upgrade it with materials from Heroic and Mythic, but the base weapon was the same whether you ran normal pugs or progged Mythic. That simplicity was a sharp turn from how legendaries usually worked. No loot council drama, no priority lists, no attendance requirements. Either the game gave it to you, or it did not. Some hunters loved that because it meant nobody could politics their way into your bow. Others hated it because there was nothing you could do to speed up the process beyond killing Sylvanas every week and praying. The real prize was Wailing Arrow, a new ability baked into the bow. It fired a shadow missile that dealt damage to your target and everything within 8 yards, then silenced everything it hit for 5 seconds. An on-demand AoE silence on a 1-minute cooldown was huge for both PvE and PvP. Blizzard liked the ability so much that when Dragonflight launched, they made Wailing Arrow a baseline talent option for all hunters, meaning the weapon's signature move outlived the weapon itself. The bow also was not even planned as a legendary originally. The design team elevated it during development because they wanted it to feel like wielding Sylvanas' actual power, not just another stat stick with her name on it. Nasz'uro, the Unbound Legacy, was the first legendary designed for a class that had only existed for one expansion. Drakthir Evokers got their own legendary fist weapon from Aberrus, the Shadowed Crucible, in patch 10.1, and the timing was not an accident. Blizzard announced Augmentation Evoker, a new spec built entirely around buffing your allies. Nasz'uro's proc did exactly that. Every Empower spell released a sphere of order magic that flew to a nearby ally and boosted their primary stat by 500 and their speed by 600 for 10 seconds. In a game where DPS meters dominate every conversation, a legendary weapon that made someone else's numbers go up was a weird concept. But for Augmentation Evoker, it was the whole identity. The weapon was crafted through a questline involving blacksmithing, engineering, and jewel crafting components, plus reagents spread across multiple types of content. You needed hundreds of temporal vestigials, ancient elementium fragments, from Aberrus bosses, awakened order from gathering nodes, and a handful of rare items like fiery souls that required specific farming. The total material cost at launch was north of several 100,000 gold if you bought everything off the auction house, and the crafting steps required coordinating with 3 different professions. For a class that was still finding its place in WoW, Nasz'uro gave Evokers their first real prestige item, and a reason for the community to take the newest class seriously as something more than a flavour of the expansion experiment. Fyr'alath, the Dreamrender, was the second legendary in Dragonflight, a 2-handed strength axe from Yggdrasil for Death Knights, Warriors and Paladins. The first one went to Miri's, a Blood Death Knight on Echo, after the Mythic World first kill of Fyr'alath. After that, every other player had to roll the dice on personal loot every week and hope. Higher difficulty meant better odds. Killing Yggdrasil bosses on Heroic and Mythic dropped lesser and greater embers of Fyr'alath as bad luck protection, slowly increasing your chances. The problem was that nobody could tell how much the embers actually helped, because there was no visible counter. Players cleared Heroic every week for months with nothing to show for it. Forum threads filled with people who had 10+ weeks of clears and no axe while guildmates got it on their second kill. The frustration was loud enough that in February 2024, Blizzard pushed a retroactive hotfix that significantly buffed the Ember effect for everyone who had been collecting them. The results were immediate and almost comical. Raids that had never seen a single axe drop suddenly had 3 or 4 land in the same lockout. Data mining after the hotfix suggested the weapon was now guaranteed after roughly 14 heroic kills, or 6 mythic kills. The axe itself was strong, with an on-use charge that dealt Shadowflame damage and a passive that applied a stacking DOT to targets, but at launch both effects had bugs. The DOT was not affected by haste, did not crit, and the stacks were capped at 5 instead of 50. Blizzard fixed those issues within weeks, but for early adopters the weapon felt noticeably undertuned compared to the hype. Fyr'alath was the first 2-handed strength legendary since Shadowmourne, over a decade later, and the community had strong opinions about whether pure RNG was the right way to distribute something that rare.